Let's talk about native concubines, the Nyai. The Nyai is essentially a native woman who becomes a concubine for a European or a Dutch man. This was during the colonization of Indonesia, which at the time was called the Dutch East Indies. The practice dates back all the way to the 1600s. In 16th of December 1620, Jan Petersen Koen, who was credited as the founder of Batavia, released the decree that prohibited the keeping of a concubine or mistress in one's house, residence, or any other place under any circumstances. Basically, this decree also targeted the bigger problem of slavery in Batavia. We need to imagine at the time Batavia was already a bustling city full of Western traders and colonial officers. But there wasn't many women. This led to many European men seeking alternatives, and they chose to have illegal relations with native women. J.P. Koen was so concerned about this fact that he lobbied and then successfully created a campaign called Company's Daughters, or Daughters of the Company, where in 1622 the VOC sent orphaned women to the colony in an effort that European men would find better companionship with European women. Basically, J.P. Koen was saying, y'all don't be swirling between the sheets. Ugh. Fast forward to 1860, where slavery was officially abolished in the Dutch East Indies, and that made any relationship between a European man and a native indigenous woman, at least on paper, consensual. But with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1867, there was a whole new wave of European men that went to the Dutch East Indies to find a better future. Between 1870 and 1880, it was reported that about 10,000 European men flocked into the Dutch East Indies. And by the 1880, the comparison between European men and European women was absurd. There was reportedly about 100,000 European men for every 123 European women. Politician and plantation owner Henry Van Call reports that out of 13,000 Dutch soldiers in the Dutch East Indies, about 22.5% of them was involved in a concubinage relationship with a native woman. And the social dynamic was so normalized that if, let's say, a European man went to a native person and asked to cari perempuan, they automatically understood that what he meant was to find a native concubine. It's easy to assume that these women consensually wanted this lifestyle, but the reality of the concubinage and the Nyai's lives were in this weird gray area. Women who become Nyai often come from extreme poverty. There were cases where they were forced into concubinage to repay their family's debt. And there were also cases where essentially these women were just household helpers, doing the cooking and cleaning for their European masters. But because of the power imbalance within these homes, if the European master asked for any and all services, the native woman had no other choice but to comply. These Nyai would live in a world of in-between. Yes, they were the managers of the household, so essentially they would have a higher social class compared to the other household servants, and for some of them, they would actually get an annual salary from the European master, but these Nyais were still non-European, meaning that they had no legal rights. And these Nyais also were not legally bound to the European master, so if a Nyai had children with a white dude, the guy could take away her children, and again, there would be nothing that she could do about it. Nyai served as translators, household managers, financial managers, and middlemen in the European household, but they were also ostracized from their own community, specifically Javanese Nyais, because they were seen as having intimate relations with the kafir, or the non-believers. Even with their proximity to power, these Nyais were still the victims of racism and misogyny, reflected by the names or how they were described that further showcased their dehumanization. The term Nyai itself was originally a very neutral term. It just described a native woman or an indigenous woman, but along the way, they were obviously used as a connotation for someone's concubine. And then the Nyais who served in the barracks or the soldier barracks were sometimes referred to as munchi. Munchi comes from the word monche that meant small mouth or little mouth. Little mouth reflects on the characteristics that a woman would have to have if they would need to survive in the barracks, essentially saying just shut up and do your job. They were also referred to sometimes as snar or snur, meaning chord in a musical instrument, likening them to a call girl. Kind of like if you ring a bell or if you kind of string a guitar, it would beckon someone to your side. Ugh. They were also referred to as mebel, meaning furniture, or inventaristuk, meaning inventory, because there was a chance that if the European master went back to Europe, these nyais could eventually be auctioned off to other Europeans and sold as inventory. There was also the name boek or woordenboek, meaning book or dictionary, I believe, because again, these nyais served as translators within the household. And then in the plantations, they were referred to as sarina or delikartina. And delikartina specifically were for the nyais that served in the plantations in Delhi in North Sumatra. These names further showcase that for these concubines, they adapted a generic name that stripped them of their individuality. Reading stories about Nyai brings a certain heaviness to my heart because they carried important weight of these two worlds, yet they were erased from both of them. They contributed to the shape and the social fabric of the colonial Dutch East Indies, but they're always referred to as footnotes or just numbers. And when you read about them, their identities and their names tend to be a part or attached to someone else's story. For many of these women, life in concubinage was not their choice. It was a way for them to survive. It was the only thing that they can do. And I hope by remembering them, even in small ways, is a way to return what history took from them, their humanity.